All right, so here we are. So as is the tradition for anybody on the internet or anywhere who spends an entire year looking at any one medium at any great lengths, we must, of course, take a little bit of time at the start of every new year and reflect back on the year that has been, try to celebrate the victories, and try to understand how the fuck the failures went so horribly, horribly wrong. So, if you are a regular viewer of Drive Home Reviews, first of all, thank you for being here. But secondly, you have probably gleaned from my reviews over the past 365 days that the year 2018, as it relates to the film industry, was not stellar, to say the very least. The films were largely ranging anywhere from just plain mediocre to downright horrific, unpleasant, and ugly. Making these lists this year, figuring out the ranking was more difficult than it ever has been doing this show because, I really had to scramble for like a top 10, and for the other two, I really had to do some cutting down. There was a lot going on. So, but that is exactly what I've done. So here we are. We're going to count down. We're going to take all the 70-some movies I saw this year, boil it down to 30 that are worth talking about for one reason or another, and categorize them for future generations. And as always, let's start at the bottom. Let's start being negative and work our way up to being positive. So, let's talk about the top 10 worst films of 2018. And we're going to get to that list. But first, dishonorable mentions. First Man and A Star Is Born. I hate both of these movies. I hate them, I hate them, I hate them. And the only reason they are not occupying a spot on the actual list itself is that I grudgingly must admit that there is nothing in them that really justifies that statement. This is a personal thing of just these movies rub me the wrong way. The way I see these films are two films by two mediocre movie stars, both of whom are desperately begging for an Oscar. First Man is probably the most boring film I have ever seen in my life. It really should be called Watching Paint Dry, the movie. And everyone's going, oh, Ryan Gosling deserves an Oscar. What, for staring blankly and having absolutely no emotional reaction to anything? And I don't give a shit. Before anybody comes in with this, I do not give a shit if that's how the real Neil Armstrong acted. Or the real Neil Armstrong acted. Because even if it was, it's boring as fuck to watch as the lead in a movie. That movie is encapsulated by the one scene where the guy comes in and goes, Neil, they've decided you're going to lead the space mission. Okay. Wow, brilliant fucking acting there. I'm really, really blown away. Give him the Oscar. And Star Is Born. Star Is Born is going to become the new Titanic for me, I think. That movie that I hate and that everybody else loves, and that's going to win all these awards, and everyone's going to go, oh, it's so beautiful, I cried so hard. And I look at it and I just see a boring story that has been told a billion times before with just so many plot holes and little inconsistencies that just drove me fucking crazy. And I know this is going to be the case because of all the videos I've posted, of all the reviews I've done. And again, I don't get that many views, okay? But of all the videos I've done, all the films I've panned, the Star Is Born review is the one that drew the most ire. I got like 4 or 5 thumbs down on that video. People went out of their way to dislike the fact that I disliked that movie. That's the hill we chose to die on. So I can just tell it's going to be one of those things that I hate and everybody else loves, and that just fucking irritates me. So If you love these films or any of the other films on this list, then more power to you. Good for you. I'm glad something connected. But for me, Lord almighty, did I hate both of these things. Okay, so enough with that. Let's get to the actual list. Number 10, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Another year, another entry on the list of please, please, please kill this franchise. You know, and the only reason why this is not sharing a slot with The Predator is because at least The Predator had a group of fun and interesting characters that I liked spending the movie with. Not this piece of shit. Characters who are unlikable, snarky, whose motivations shift on a dime, a plot that makes next to no sense and is filled with so many goddamn plot holes, even for a Jurassic Park movie. And what makes it worse is that I had the opportunity to go see the original Jurassic Park on the big screen this past year, and all it served to do was show how far this fucking franchise has fallen. Number 9, Forever My Girl. I actually had to go back and rewatch my review on this to remind myself what all went on in this film. I remembered the film, but I could not remember all the things I hated about it. And what's funny is watching that review, at the very beginning I say that I think I may have found the worst film of 2018. And all I could say is, boy, if I only knew how much further the year had to fall. But yeah, this thing was an incompetent film filled with Z-level talent and direction and acting and writing that would have been more at home on Lifetime or the Hallmark Channel. Number 8, Puzzle. Ah, yes, it wouldn't be a year if we didn't have the artistic overreach film that makes the bold statement that it's okay to do horrible things to other people because they're not telling you you're special every day. This film was just obnoxious, and honestly, there's not much else to say about it. Number 7, Den of Thieves and Mile 22. Yay, it's mediocre action film time. Lord almighty, these things are awful. What made them even worse, aside from the fact that they had stilted acting, unlikable characters, action scenes that were uninspired and uninteresting, is the absolute pompousness of both of them carrying themselves like they're some big, important film, when in fact they were some of the most disposable cinema I have ever laid eyes on. The only good thing about Den of Thieves is that it represents the best acting my intro to theater class did all year when they convinced me to go see that piece of shit. Number 6, Overboard. All right, look, you're not going to hear me say that the 80s were the most sensitive time. We were not anywhere near as evolved as we are now in terms of race, sex, or gender politics in any way, shape, or form. And movies like Overboard, which sound cute at the time, take on kind of a creepy vibe now if you try to explain them to somebody. That being said, and that being true, I do not recall a moment in the original Overboard where Kurt Russell made Goldie Hawn sleep out in the woodshed with nothing but a large soda bottle to piss in. You know, folks, abuse is abuse regardless of who the fuck it's being perpetrated against. Number 5, Venom. Only good thing about this movie is now maybe people will shut up about, they got Venom wrong in Spider-Man 3. They got it more right than this piece of shit did. Everything about this is wrong. Everything about this is just so painful to sit through. Yeah, I mean, what the hell else is there to say? Just bad. Bad movie. Bad. Bad movie. You go and you think about what you did, and dear God, don't think about doing it again in a sequel. Number 4. 50 Shades Freed. I feel bad even putting this on a list of top 10 or bottom 10 worst movies, because this isn't really a movie. It's the masturbation fantasy. And I have no problem with that. There's nothing wrong with films helping us to realize our fantasies of power or sexual attraction or whatever. That's kind of what movies are there for, to provide us with an escape. But your movie has no plot, and when it does have a plot, it zooms away from that so we can go on expensive vacations and have sex in the kitchen. Actors who have no chemistry together playing pretty reprehensible and disturbing characters. And yes, again, I try not to shit on other people's fantasies or what they like, because it is a book, it's not real, and I think most people are smart enough to realize that. But I'm sorry, there is something inherently icky about the film where a guy with extreme emotional problems can be fixed by having a baby. Oh, he always did want kids. He just didn't know it till he had them. Well, now his psychological problems are all done. Yeah, no, folks, trust me, that ain't the way that fucking works. Number 3. Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. I hate to say it, but I'm afraid J.K. Rowling is now in danger of becoming the new George Lucas. That person who is so enamored by their own genius of this wonderful world that they've created that they now believe everything they do is so deep and is expanding the lore, when in fact it is becoming nothing but overcomplicated, contradictory, ridiculous, without hardly a trace of any of the wonderful things that made it beloved in the first place. This film meanders around. It shits all over the good parts of its own original film. It contradicts things that have been established for a very long time in the original series, and not in a way of, subverting expectations or saying, oh, this was really this all this time, or here's something that adds a little bit more depth and interest to this. No, and Voldemort's snake was really a woman all this time, because that makes fucking sense. And what makes it worse, 2 things make it worse. Number 1, its fan base is still so sycophantic and so desperate for any new Harry Potter material that they're willing to overlook and fawn over all of this mess. And the second thing is that once you get through almost this film's 3-hour runtime and you look back at this jumble of plot holes and contradictions, you realize we have not come very far at all. You've barely taken a step. You took 3 hours to tell us nothing, and worst of all, you are convinced you are telling us everything. Number 2. Little Women. It seems bizarre to give the number 2 slot in the worst films of the year list to a fairly pointless and ultimately forgettable movie that nobody saw. I mean, Elizabeth and I were the only 2 people in the theater when we went to see it, so it's not like this had the ability to offend a huge number of people, but that does not make it any less offensive. This film is an excellent example of anybody who says, well, I'm going to do a modern retelling of blank, of how not to do it. You take a character like Jo March, who is in literature one of the most independent, forward-thinking, remarkable heroines ever, and you turn her into just another whiny, entitled, millennial douchebag who believes that everything that happens is only important in it so far as it affects her. And the number one worst movie of 2018 is Red Sparrow. I've said this before, and I want to say it again for context. I don't get paid for this, okay? I'm not a YouTuber in the sense that this is how I make my living. I'm not the Nostalgia Critic. I'm not Lindsay Ellis. I'm not Movie Bob. I'm not Yahtzee. I'm not Todd in the Shadows. I'm not the Cinema Snob or any of the other folks out there who are making some really amazing and fun content. You know, those are people for whom that is their job, hence why their production values are much higher than mine, you know, why there's more time and energy put into it. I already have a job. I do this because I love it. I do this because it's fun for me. I like going to the movies, and I like talking about movies. You know? And even in a situation where I know that the film I'm going to go see is going to be bad, that doesn't necessarily bother me, because I know that when I come out, either A, I'm going to be surprised, and maybe I've discovered something that, you know, had more merit to it than we gave it credit for, and that's happened. Or B, I am at least going to have something fun to talk about when I'm done. I do this because I love it. Okay? And I need to make sure that that fact is understood when I explain that this movie made me hate going to the movies. This film is so ugly, rancid, horrific, and just downright unpleasant that it made not only sitting through it and reviewing it an impossible chore, but it made it so difficult for me to get out of the house every week and go back to the cinema. Okay? This film tainted something that I truly love. And what makes it worse, what really puts this film above a lot of the others, is that I get the direct impression watching it that that is exactly what the filmmaker wanted. They wanted you to hate things you love. You know, oh, you think James Bond movies where he seduces all the women is fun? Well, what if we showed you the horrible things that actually happened to these women? Oh, ruined that for you, didn't we? Ha ha ha! I've seen poorer made films this year. I've seen more incompetent movies this year. I guess I could say I've seen more offensive movies this year, but I really can't think of any. But I have never seen a movie that made me almost physically ill, not just while watching it, but for several weeks afterwards when I tried to get up and go to the movies again and I felt sick. Okay? That is what this movie did to me, and as far as I'm concerned, that is an unforgivable sin. And it's for that reason that Red Sparrow is the worst movie of 2018. All right, so we've talked about the ugliness. We've talked about the bad things. Well, now we can bury those films deep, deep underground and pretend they never existed and try to start slowly picking ourselves back up. So, when next we meet, we're going to start thinking a little bit more positive. But before we can get to the best films of 2018, we've talked about the worst. We're going to talk about the rest. It's time to talk about the rest. So we're going to talk about the top 10 meh films of 2018. So we'll see you next time. And until then, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.